Hi there, I'm John Michael Garapi, and I'm talking to Stephen Albair about his book Spectacles, which I edited. How you doing, Stephen? I'm
doing fine. It's great to be back in New England, at least until today with the weather. But
yeah, it's great to have you back.
Thank you.
Really get a chance to see you in person. Where did the title Spectacles come from?
It basically is an open-ended word. You know, spectacles is an old word that refers to glasses, but it also refers to some sort of event in which there's something extraordinary taking place. And so I wanted to do that, and that's why the book cover is sort of a partial stage, and in the back is a stage. Something is staged.
You chose to make this book a memoir. What inspired you to make a memoir?
Well, my work is all about a personal memoir, and this is just simply an extension of my work. And although it's a photo book, as well as highlighting my career as a jeweler, but my career as a jeweler was from 1969 to 1989. I started both things together and ended up doing mainly, since 1989, photography. So it was a way of accessing that information that was part of my work.
Why don't you read me an excerpt from the book? The section is called The Beat Goes On. We are talking specifically about Keith Haring. So what was your relationship to him?
In New York of the 80s, and it was in the 80s, Keith Haring was very much a part of the art scene. And I was living there in New York during the 80s, and we lived in the same neighborhood. You know, we were both, although he was a much bigger star, but I was part of the art scene and he was part of the art scene. And it was basically the East Village art scene at that time, but he was already a megastar by the time he was 22. But we just happened to overlap, and as my job as a director of a campus center, I was trying to get him involved in the university that I was working with at that time.
Why don't you read us an excerpt from your book?
Okay, so this is just part of it in which I kind of introduce Keith Haring, and it begins, as the director of a college campus in New York City, I was responsible for suggesting exhibitions that might interest students. Someone tipped me off there was a student show at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. The work of one student, Keith Haring, was not to be missed. In a small empty room off from the main gallery, the entire floor was painted with calligraphic lines and abstract figures, except for a tiny unpainted space in the far corner, with flowing brushstrokes which he would not pause until he was finished. A young Keith Haring had painted himself into a corner. This was a form of performance art via painting. The result was a playful mandala in black and white with small spot for him to sit and to observe his work. I was awestruck. An already notorious graffiti artist, Keith Haring was a star in the art world by the time he was 22. My studio in Chinatown was close to his studio in the Bowery. We frequented the same breakfast diner popular among a group of local artists. He was polite, rather shy, preferring the company of soft-spoken working-class men. I chatted with him a few times. He was courteous, acknowledging anyone he recognized with a smile and a head nod. His art was for everybody, and his audience included everybody. I loved his drawing skills and how he reduced his images to hieroglyphics, which everyone seemed to be able to understand. One time I joined a silent crowd at West 4th Street station as we watched him draw two figures on a blank, empty billboard, one holding a radiant heart while the other one danced straight through his body. Another time I spotted him at Union Square station, sketching with speed and precision his familiar creeping babies with radiant lines around them. He seldom assigned precise meanings to any of these drawings. When he finished, he dashed through the closing doors of the outbound train. He timed his chalk drawings perfectly to avoid two policemen coming from opposite directions. Keith was arrested several times for vandalism, but people loved his drawings, which celebrated love and life. I remember calling graffiti visual pollution. Keith's pieces and skillful drawing changed my mind. His work was suddenly everywhere, especially where we lived on the Lower East Side, and eventually far beyond, when copycat artists cloned his style of drawing.
The viewer right now is looking at in process. You're a jewelry artist as well as a photographer. I think the audience would like to know exactly what is the jewelry? What are we looking at here?
The way I saw Keith Haring in his work was that there was always a twist of some kind. And so this piece has a hand that comes down and clasps, and the hand is very much like the Statue of Liberty, holding a paintbrush. And from the paintbrush are radiating these little men that are very Keith Haring-like, although I never saw him actually doing men like this. And the jewelry is the paint on the brush, not the little men. And so you can take the paint off the brush. It's about 2 inches by maybe 3/4 of an inch, and it goes in a sport coat pocket. The whole thing then is on matte plexiglass, like a billboard, very much like his billboards,
Right.
in which it kind of has a reflection of graffiti and taking it back to him.
Yeah. You also worked on a drawing by the name of Male Icon. I was wondering how In Process and Male Icon related to each other.
What I did is I was so infatuated, so to speak, with his work and the little men that I began to. Initially, the little men were little dancing figures that were used in the jewelry industry, the commercial jewelry industry, as pens with a male and female figure, but I cut all of the females out because the males were more animate. In using the drawing and putting the drawing together, I used the silhouettes of the little men dancing around the tie, which is a male icon, and above it is a rainbow, and radiating from it, because he used all this radiation. So I was trying to sort of redo a lot of what I had learned from him, you know, as an artist, and the kinds of things that he was doing.
Yeah, they're really beautiful works. I've appreciated a tremendous amount of work. I've been incredibly lucky to be able to edit a work like this. Working with you, I get this inside knowledge.
Thank you.
One of the pieces I specifically like is Flight Projection. And I'm wondering if you could walk me through where that work came from.
Yeah, that's an interesting one that you should pick that one out. It really goes back because these are narratives, right, in their first-person narratives. And this one, you know, which was done really initially in 1972 to 76, kept having these dreams about my bedroom when I was 12 years old. And in my bedroom, my mother and I had helped her wallpaper the walls. Because I was helping her, I didn't say anything about the wallpaper, but it was bows and flowers, and it just didn't work for me. And so I would often turn the light on and read and notice the shadows on the wall, and then got involved in various kinds of shadow puppets and shadow things. And so the piece of jewelry are 2 hands that are together. And so the photograph on the back can't be seen by anyone except the wearer, because that's the back of the piece. And so it has this intimate quality, and it's very dimensional, the base. And so what happens is it becomes sort of a room or a stage or a theater. And it was really one of my first attempts at staging the jewelry, so the jewelry fit into something and then it became a stage.
Let's talk about 2-channel color TV and how your jewelry work eventually became part of your tableau photography work, which led you to create How Dare You Not Be Me. Could you walk us through that process?
Certainly, yeah. That one is kind of that extension of that theatrical kind of presence of the jewelry. And this is a collaborative piece. So I worked with 2 other people, Amy Buckingham, who designed the base of the TV, and Jim Smith, who did the painting of the TV guide that sets on the stand. And the idea of the piece is that it's from an old television. It's a Sylvania blue dot. There's a little lightning bolt that comes down to a diamond. The piece is very small, actually. It's not that big. It's maybe 2 1/4 inches or less by about 2 inches. It sets onto the body through a pin, and then the antenna will scope up. And so it's very interactive, so that, you know, when you're wearing it, you can have it in this direction, that direction, or straight out to the viewer. I felt that it was like one of the best pieces that I had ever done, and I wanted to do more with it with my photography. And I came across the line, you know, how dare you not be me? And it just seemed profound, because anyone that's been in any kind of a relationship with another person, especially an intimate relationship, and you have those days where you're just talking, it's like, why can't you be like me? You know, if you could be a little bit more like me, then we would get along a lot better. And so that's how the image came up, with the man who's sitting in this easy chair and the woman standing over him, and he's got the the TV, because it's two channels. One channel is a bride and groom that are kissing. On the other channel, which you can flip, and you can flip while you're wearing it, is a ballerina who is balancing balls. And he's watching the ballerina in her little dress and eating ice cream and drinking and whatnot as she approaches him and says, "Why can't you not be me?"
A lot of these photographs, a lot of this artwork was made in a lot of different locations around the United States, because you lived in a lot of places, you taught in a lot of different schools. And I was wondering how much a place's location affects the type of work you're going to make, and how much location gets infused into your work.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think that every place I've ever taught, which is a lot, about 12 different locations, and also in Nova Scotia, and part of being able to do that is being in the present. So when I did these, visiting artist positions, and I would often try to figure out what the space was like and how it was doing, and I had time to work. And so I would do little sketches and try to come up with ideas that had something to do with the present, what was going on right now. And so the sense of place very profoundly, began to assign my work. It took me about, I'd say, 10 years of living in San Francisco before I actually began to incorporate a sense of place. I never really understood that, but I think it's because the work became, again, much more narrative and much more personal in its iconography and what those images were. They were just really about me. And so then I began to think about it, and it opened up a whole world of possibilities. And I had to sort of stop doing things that were just simply based in San Francisco and were not as universal that all of the other work that I've done was. I didn't want it to define the place that I was at. I wanted to be affected by I wanted to be simply affected by the place that I was living at that particular time.
Yeah. Well, again, like I've said beforehand, a lot of the images in this book are beautiful. I'm sure that many people who are watching this would like to know, where can they go to find more about it?
My website, thank you for asking, www.stephenalbair.com. It's currently being sold at the Museum of Craft and Design in San Francisco. But the best place is my website.
Awesome. Thank you for being on, Stephen.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.